Number 3. Clevin Brown and Edward Washington III. Super Bowl 45 was held on February 6, 2011 in Arlington, Texas. The Pittsburgh Steelers were playing the Green Bay Packers. On Facebook, 20-year-old Jeremiah Thomas made a bet with 18-year-old Edward Trey Washington III. Thomas's family was well-to-do. His father was Steve Harvey's project manager and barber. His mother owned several barber shops. Thomas was a promising young rapper known as JT, Guaranteed to Wreck. Thomas's lyrics focused on positivity. He didn't rap about violence, drugs, or degrade women. In early 2011, he released a song that was getting some airplay on the radio and in the clubs. He was planning on signing a record deal in mid-March. Trey Washington was a member of a street gang called the Lynch Mob. Thomas predicted that the Pittsburgh Steelers would win. The wager was $40. But the Green Bay Packers ended up winning 31-25. Thomas said he didn't consider it a real bet and refused to pay Washington the $40. So Washington started threatening him over the phone and through text messages. He also told friends he was going to kill Thomas. Washington then offered to sell the bet with a fistfight, but Thomas didn't want to fight. So Washington offered to meet and make peace. They agreed to meet at a convenience store in Arlington in the early morning hours of March 14th. Thomas arrived in a car with 2 friends and his girlfriend. Unfortunately, it was a trap. Washington and 2 other gang members used their car to block in the car Thomas and his friends were in. 3 gang members pulled Thomas out of the car. Thomas and his 2 friends started fighting with the 3 gang members. One of the gang members, 18-year-old Clevin Brown, shot Thomas in the arm and the chest. Thomas's friends rushed him to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. He had bled to death in his girlfriend's arms. He was 1 day away from signing a record deal. Trey Washington and Clevin Brown were both arrested. Clevin Brown went to trial first in April 2012. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours and found him guilty. He was sentenced to 50 years of prison. After he was sentenced, Thomas's mother waved 2 $20 bills at him and said, "Is this all my son was worth to you?" Trey Washington went to trial in January 2013. His lawyer pointed out that he didn't pull the trigger or even bring a gun to the scene. The prosecution said that was true, but pointed out that Thomas would have been alive had it not been for Washington's actions. Washington was found guilty of murder and he was sentenced to 35 years of prison. At the time of this recording, 30-year-old Clevin Brown is serving a sentence at the AHH Cofield Unit near Tennessee Colony, Texas. He'll be eligible for parole in November 2036. He'll be 43 years old. 28-year-old Trey Washington is serving his sentence at the Mark W. Stiles Unit in Beaumont, Texas. He'll be able to apply for parole in April 2030 when he is 35. Number 2. Aaron Rutigliano. Super Bowl 49 was held on February 1, 2015 in Phoenix, Arizona. The New England Patriots were playing the Seattle Seahawks. That night in Chicago, Illinois, there was a snowstorm. But that didn't stop Drew Akbar and Mia McNair from having a Super Bowl party. 29-year-old Aaron Rutigliano came to the party with his girlfriend, Danielle Fernandez. Many people were drinking and smoking marijuana at the party. The halftime show featured Katy Perry, but what most people remember from the show is the dancer known as Left Shark. After halftime, Fernandez asked Rutigliano if he wanted to go to another party. He said no because the weather was too bad. Not long after, Rutigliano picked up a steak knife and put it in his back pocket. He He then started acting erratically. He and Fernandez were in the kitchen. He grabbed Fernandez's arm very tightly. He said something to the effect of everyone wanted to kill him and he had been training for this, so he was going to kill them first. He then threw her against some shelving and then pushed her to the floor. He grabbed her by the hair and pushed her to the ground again. At this point, Fernandez was screaming for help. Two other guests came to the kitchen and screamed at Rutigliano to stop. Rutigliano had the knife in his hand and he pushed one of the party guests to the ground, cutting her wrist in the process. He then turned his attention to 23-year-old musician Antonio Gamboa. He pushed him up against the wall and commenced stabbing him. The other partygoers and the host tried to get him to stop. Fernandez ran and locked herself in the washroom. The hosts each stabbed Rutigliano and left the knives in him, but this didn't stop him. The guest, whose wrist was cut, threw a vase at Rutigliano, hitting him in the head. When that didn't stop him, she threw a bowl at his head. Rutigliano then stopped stabbing Gamboa and he fell to the floor. Rutigliano then faced the woman who threw the vase and the bowl. She ran from the apartment and into a neighbor's apartment. The host of the party managed to wrestle Rutigliano to the ground and climb on top of him. Several people had called 911. They arrived shortly afterward and arrested 29-year-old Aaron Rutigliano. Unfortunately, not much could be done for 23-year-old Antonio Gamboa. He had been stabbed 5 times in the chest, twice in the neck, 4 times in the back, and twice in the left eye. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Everyone else survived their wounds, including Rutigliano, who had been stabbed twice and hit twice in the head. In January 2017, Aaron Rutigliano was convicted of first-degree murder and aggravated battery/use of a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to 32 years of prison. 37-year-old Aaron Rutigliano is currently serving his sentence at the Hill Correctional Center in Galesburg, Illinois. He'll be able to apply for parole in July 2047 when he's 61 years old. Number 1. Stephen Romano. Stephen Romano was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1953. He was Carmen and Grace Romano's only child. In the early 1960s, the family moved to Vineland, New Jersey. In 1974, Stephen's daughter, Michelle, was born. It's unclear if Stephen and Michelle's mother were ever married, but Stephen never moved out of his parents' home. In the late 1980s, Michelle lived with her father and grandparents while her mother lived elsewhere. Carmen worked at a glass bottle manufacturer and Grace was a homemaker. She also worked as a waitress at a popular restaurant. Eventually, Stephen got a job at the same factory where his father worked. In the early 1990s, Stephen began to show signs of mental illness. He spent some time in a psychiatric hospital. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and obsessive-compulsive disorder. After working for 12 years at the factory, he had to go on disability. Carmen worked at the factory for 20 years. He then got a part-time job as a security guard. Michelle Romano dropped out of high school in her senior year. She got a job as a waitress at a family restaurant. She also worked at an ice cream shop. In early 1997, Stephen's mental health was getting worse. He thought that zombies were coming after his family. He also thought that a sex worker was trying to give him AIDS. On January 26, 1997, it was Super Bowl 31, and it was held in New Orleans, Louisiana. Playing in that Super Bowl was the Green Bay Packers and the New England Patriots. It had been 29 years since the Packers had been in the Super Bowl. They had won the first 2 Super Bowls and then only had one playoff appearance in the 1970s and 1980s, respectively. Their luck started to turn around after the hiring of head coach Mike Holmgren and the team traded for quarterback Brett Favre. It It was the Patriots' second Super Bowl appearance. The first time they played was in Super Bowl 20 in 1986, and they lost to the Chicago Bears. Super Bowl 31 was the first of 10 Super Bowl appearances under the ownership of Robert Kraft. Steven Romano called one of his friends to come over to watch the Super Bowl, and he said he would come. However, his friend got tied up and planned to come over at halftime. This may have saved his life. In the Romano house that night was 43-year-old Stephen, his parents, 68-year-old Carmen, his 66-year-old Grace, his daughter, 22-year-old Michelle, and her 17-year-old boyfriend, Joey Rivera. Also there was the family's beloved Chihuahua, Cuddles. Shortly after the game started, without warning, Stephen started shooting his family. When the shooting started, Joey was on the second floor of the house. He climbed out the window, jumped onto an air conditioning unit that was attached to the side of the house, and then jumped to the ground. Once he was on the ground, he called 911 with his cell phone. The dispatcher could hear the gunshots. By the time police officers arrived at the house, the shooting had stopped. They went inside the house and found the dead bodies of Grace, Carmen, Michelle, Stephen, and even Cuddles. Grace, Carmen, and Michelle had all been shot in the head and the chest. A 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun and a .357 Magnum were both used. Once Stephen had killed his family, he pointed the Magnum at his chest and pulled the trigger. Joey Rivera was interviewed, and he said nothing seemed unusual before the shooting. There was no fighting or arguing. Stephen just started shooting. Many of Stephen's friends said that he was a kind and generous man. They blamed his disturbing actions on his mental illness. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.